So as we start this series, Our Imperfect Family, I know that there's different people in this room. There's people that you came from a really good family history. You had great parents, you had great grandparents, you grew up in a healthy home, you maybe grew up in the church and you know what it means to see healthy. You may be here today and maybe you've been through great dysfunction. I've had 3 different mothers in my life. I've went through some really difficult seasons of life of being a son and being a brother and now being a father. So maybe that's you today. There's been a lot of hurdles in your past history, your family tree's kind of kooky. It looks a little different than other people. Maybe that's you today. And so I believe so strongly that we're going to learn through the life of Joseph today. We're going to learn about how to make critical choices at critical moments. And I don't know what you're up against in life right now. I don't know if life is smooth sailing, or I don't know if life is pretty turbulent right now. I don't know if maybe you've come out of making some big choices where you followed Christ and now you're living in the good part of that, or maybe you've missed God and you feel like you're living in the punishment of a missed decision. I'm setting this all up for the series so that you know that no matter who you are, no matter where you come from or what you think about God, I believe that over the next 4 weeks, the Spirit of God is going to speak to us. See, today is called Critical Choices, and life is full of them. In fact, today alone, you will make hundreds of choices. Just today. Not the whole week. I mean, in the course of a lifetime, I would almost say you probably make billions or trillions of choices over the course of your life. Now, some are as simple as to put cologne on or not. I chose to because I don't want to offend anyone. So I make small choices like that for the benefit of the people I'm worshiping with on Sunday morning. You maybe made a choice on what you wore today, or husbands, maybe you just nodded and said yes to what your wife picked out. She made that choice, I'm not sure. You chose whether you were going to ride together today or go separate. You'll choose where you go to lunch after this. You chose shorts or pants, khakis or blue jeans, chicken or burgers. We have choices all day, every day. Now, these choices don't matter much. We have choices that are very inconsequential to our life, and these are some of them. You still have to make them, but they don't matter that much. Now, some choices, they do. Some choices forever change the landscape of your life. Who you marry. That could drastically change the outcome of your life. Some are praising God for it, and some are nodding their head a little bit. Dang it. If I could go back in time. Marriage, who you choose to attach yourself to in a union of sanctity and marriage, that drastically changes the outcome of your life. Maybe if you were going to go to college, and then once you decided to go to college, what college? And then once you decided to college, what to major in? And then when you decided that wasn't what you wanted to major in anymore, and for the 3rd time you changed your major, once you got to that 3rd major choice, come on somebody, by that time, that could have drastically changed the outcome of your life. What about kids? Are we going to have kids? If so, how many? When's enough? My brother has 5, I have 1. I think 1 is enough. That's my choice. My brother, he flourishes with 5, and I can't handle 1. So that's a choice. That's a critical choice for us. Do we stay put, or do we swing for the fences and just see what happens? I don't know. What church we belong to. This is a critical choice. How you decide to dive into a family of imperfect people pursuing a perfect God, that's a critical choice for your life. It will forever change the trajectory of your life and where you choose to connect yourself to. Some choices don't matter, and some matter very deeply. And then there's this other element of choices. You know that there's choices that were made for you that you didn't get a say in? What family you were born into, you got no say in that. God did. That was God's design. That was God's choice. God could have picked any parents for you. God could have picked any level of comfort for your childhood. I don't know why my childhood looks so different than other people, but God picked that for me. And now I look back and say, I didn't have a choice in that, but God, I'm so thankful that you did it that way, because wow, I would have never become the person I am today had I not went through that. So you didn't get to choose your parents. You didn't get to choose the city that you grow up in. You didn't get to choose whether your family put faith at a high level in your home growing up. It wasn't very important in my home. I didn't get to choose that. And so today I just want to level the playing field. There's choices that don't matter, there's choices that change our life, and there's choices that have been made for us. And so we have to understand how to navigate through those, and the choices that we have ownership over and God has given to us. I want to talk about the critical ones today. It doesn't matter where you come from, it matters where you're going. I need someone to know that today. You disqualify yourself because of where you come from. You're not smart enough. You're not pretty enough. You don't have enough information in your back pocket. You didn't go to school long enough. So therefore, I just got to kind of mind my business and stay in this lowly place. It doesn't matter where you come from. It matters where you're going. No matter what choices were made for you, no matter how good or bad, how stable or chaotic your life has been, you have a choice today. You get to choose how you hear this message, how you apply it to your life. That is your choice and your choice alone. Critical choices can propel you or pummel you. Critical choices can take you to that next place in your life, or it could set you back a decade. And so today we're going to look at the life of Joseph from the Old Testament. This is the same Joseph. He's got a pretty good family history in the form of notoriety. You may know his great-great-grandfather was Abraham. Abraham had a son. His name was Isaac. Isaac had a son, and his name was Jacob. And Jacob had a son. He had 12, in fact, and one of them was named Joseph. Joseph was the same one that had the Technicolor robe that you may have heard about or seen a Halloween costume of. That's the Joseph we're talking about. The 12 tribes of Israel are formed out of these 12 sons of Jacob. This is a very important family in the history and the genealogy leading up to Jesus and to the church today. Joseph is a big part of the early part of what God did in the book of Genesis. And so we're going to get to his story, but I think his story, if he was writing it, it wouldn't have looked anything like it ended up being. I don't think anyone would write their story the way that Joseph lived it out. And as I've thought through this, I'll remember I just graduated from Master's Commission, and I did my part, and I was so ready to take on the world and win the world for Jesus, 2007, and I had this awesome job lined up in Texas. It was everything that I wanted. It was at a great church, at a big church, all the things that I thought were important at the time. And then God showed up in a still small voice and called me back to the wilderness, which was Wisconsin, which was the place that I ran from when I didn't know Jesus. And now he called me back to a church plant, of all things, meeting in a library with 3 students in their youth ministry, and they wanted me to become their youth pastor. It sounded really prestigious, right? And then on top of all that, they couldn't pay me. Oh, cool. So let me turn down this job in Texas that is going to really pay me well, that is going to set me up in an influential church that many people look to. Let me skip all that to go to a church plant meeting in a library with 3 kids. And they were the pastor's kids. They didn't even get a choice to be a part of the youth ministry. We started out meeting in a nursing home. Hold on. Hey, students, as I'm at your high school football game, high five. Hey, you want to come to youth group on Wednesday night? Cool, man. Where do you meet? Yeah, we meet at the nursing home. We rent out a room in their nursing home, and there was this one old lady, Betty, that every single Wednesday, there were 2 doors to open up into the nursing home room, and she walked in one and said, "Oh, who are you guys?" And we would say, "Hey, we're Revolution Youth Group, so glad that you're here." She would walk out, she would walk to the other set of double doors, she would walk in and say, "Hey, who are you guys?" Every single Wednesday. It was the sweetest thing in the whole world, but this was our reality. This wasn't what I had planned. This wasn't what I thought it would look like. I thought I did everything I needed to do, God, so that you could set me up for this incredible trajectory in ministry, but I had to start in a very lowly place. But it started with critical choices. There was a critical choice when I knew God was calling me to Wisconsin, but I really wanted to go to Texas. There was a critical choice. And I had to hold on that God had promised me and that God was in that decision. I look back now and I would never change a moment of that history. This looks a lot like Joseph. We're going to read in Genesis chapter 37. I'm going to narrate some of this. I'm going to stop a few times. I'm just going to tell you on the front side, I need 13 extra minutes than I normally get. You would say, why do you need 13 minutes? Well, because we have a 13-minute testimony video that I'm going to show you today, and I'm just telling you, get some Kleenex ready when that comes on, because it is going to be an incredible testimony of what God has done through critical choices of holding on to Jesus in the midst of unbelievable difficulty. So, Genesis chapter 37, starting in verse 1, here's the story. Jacob, this was Joseph's father, lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And he brought their father, I know wives, plural, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel, who's also Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. You see, sometimes there's like implied favoritism. Sometimes you just think you can read between the lines a little bit and be like, Dad likes him so much more than me. It's so obvious. This is literally as obvious and as real as it gets. Like there was no hiding the fact that Jacob loved Joseph the most. Are there any favorites here today? Like you just know you were the favorite growing up. Is there anyone that would say, I was the black sheep of my family? I know it, they knew it, everybody knew it. My brother thinks I was the favorite. I dispute that often. I think I had it pretty difficult as well. But verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in old age. Joseph was a gift in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. Sounds like Joseph was in a pretty dysfunctional environment. Now I said, I don't know where you come from, but my dysfunction's starting to look not that bad. Because it seems as if Joseph was just minding his business. Joseph was just doing what was asked of him as a 17-year-old boy, and then God shows up and God gives him a dream. And we're going to go into this in a moment. God gives him a dream. He didn't ask God for the dream. We don't see him pleading on his knees day after day, God, would you give me this crazy dream that everyone's going to hate me for? But we see that God interrupts the normalcy of his life and drops a dream. Can I tell you something? Many people in this room, you wait Sunday to Sunday for God to move in your life. I'm just telling you, it could be when you're shepherding sheep in the fields and you're doing the normal things in the normal part of your life. And if you would have availability for God to speak and for God to move, he can show up and interrupt the normalcy of your life. And we see this with Joseph. God just shows up, unplanned and unannounced. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us, right? These are his older brothers. Learn something about the time period in which this would have been said. You don't get this right as a younger brother. Like now, younger brother, older brother, it's much different. Back then, there was a genealogy and a lineage to your authority. So as the second youngest son, there was no way that this was practical. This would be almost heretical to say. They hated him all the more because of his dream and what he said. And then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said. He should have kept this one to himself. I don't know why. After that first part, I would have just kept that one to myself, but I had another dream. And this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Joseph didn't ask for this dream. And then God shows up, and God gives him an audacious, a ridiculous, an outlandish dream. Now, should Joseph have said this to his brothers and family? It doesn't say that God was upset that he said it, but this drastically changes the outcome of his life. This was a critical choice for Joseph. Do I listen to the dream, as crazy and ridiculous as it is, or do I just say this was bad pizza, I had a bad dream, my stomach was a little upset, and this couldn't possibly be from God? This was a critical choice for Joseph. Do I hold on to the dream, or do I dismiss it? I believe God has spoke some crazy things over some people in this room. Some things that don't make sense. Some things that you can never do without God. And I'm believing today that may be why God brings you here, is to revive the dream. To revive the thing that you have put off and said, there's just no way. Do you know what they'll say about me? Do you know what my family would do? Do you know what this will cost me? Joseph holds on to the dream. I think there's two participants in every dream. You have the dreamer and you have the people that are supposed to support the dream. The only people that you have really in your life is your immediate family, right? Your blood. Everyone else is just kind of added on to that. And the very people, the parents and the brothers that were supposed to protect him and love him and encourage him, they were the very same people that rebuked him. So maybe today you're the dreamer. And God's going to say, you better hold on to that dream. Don't you let go of that dream that came from me. I know other people around you, they don't understand it. It doesn't make sense. It's too far gone. But today God may say, hold on to the dream. And if that's not you, maybe today you're not the dreamer. But your job is going to be to support the dream. Maybe that's what God is going to do. Genesis chapter 37, move on to verse 19. He's out in the field. His brother says, here comes that dreamer. I wonder when you're walking into the office tomorrow morning, what people say. Here comes that lady, always happy. Nothing's ever wrong with her. Man, she's got the perfect husband and the perfect kid. She's always got joy. Here comes Miss Joyful. Or maybe it's, here comes Mr. Know-It-All. He knows everything about everything. Can't nobody ever suggest anything, because guess who knows that? What do people say? But we see here that this was the stigma of Joseph's life. Here comes that dreamer. They said to each other, come now, let's kill him. I like how they started softly with that one. Maybe let's rough him up a little bit. Let's take him out back. No, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Yeah, that's kind of the ultimate trump card in this situation, is if we kill him, we kill the dream. One of his brothers says, we're not going to kill him. They throw him in this big hole in the ground. He decides that he's just going to manipulate his brothers into thinking we'll kill him later. At the same time, there's a group of Ishmaelites coming down the road, and he gets sold into slavery. And I'll just say this, many of you know how this story ends. There's not some thriller ending that you've never heard. We're walking through a familiar text for some people. But Joseph is doing everything right. Then God shows up and gives him a dream, and that dream almost gets him killed, but not quite. It just gets him sold into slavery. Now, many times we can read these things in the Bible, and we can never put it personally into our lives. What would that be like? You've had this mountaintop experience from God. He's spoken over your life, and the reaction to that is, God, you allowed me to get sold into slavery? Where are you, God? This doesn't seem like something you would do. This doesn't seem like the timeline in which I planned out my life. There's a critical choice that's about to happen. Because how Joseph responds to what God has allowed will change everything about his life. How many times we got mad at God? Because something happened in someone's health. Something happened in one of our relationships. Something happened financially. And our first response was to get angry at God and turn away from God. Joseph had every reason to say no to God. God, I don't want your plan for my life. If this is what it looks like, you give me a dream, I communicate the dream, and I get sold away from my family. Imagine literally what this would mean. We pick up in Genesis chapter 39. This is about 10 chapters worth of a story. I'm just skimming through parts of it. Genesis chapter 39, we'll read the first 6 verses. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, even in slavery. Even when Joseph did nothing wrong, he didn't earn this punishment. It says the Lord was with him, even as he was being bought by an owner in slavery. And he prospered. He lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. Sounds like God was up to something. Sounds like God had thought this out a little bit more than Joseph might have thought. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Joseph was a slave that had nothing. He didn't even have a name for himself anymore. He was sold into a foreign country. He didn't know anything about the way that they lived. And in fact, he was a God-fearing man that went into a pagan environment. But it says over and over that the Lord was with him and God's favor was on him. I want to tell you something about favor. Many times favor I've thought about, you're talking about favor, talking about new cars, checks showing up in the mail that, you didn't expect, showing, promotions at work. God can do those things. That's his business. But favor could come in the form of peace over your life today. God's favor could say, you know what? You're not in punishment right now. You see, Joseph could have looked at prison as, God, where did I miss you? God, where did I go off? Where did I go wrong? But we don't see anything in the text that alludes us to think that Joseph had done something wrong to get sold into slavery. Now, this is a paradox in our belief system. Right? I believe that God is for you. I believe that God would never hurt you, that God would never turn away from you. I believe all those things with all my heart. But is it possible that it was God's design that Joseph would be sold into slavery? Is that possible that God would allow that over Joseph's life? I think it is. And many times we're walking through seasons in our life, and we think the reason that we're in it is because God's punishing us, or we missed God somewhere along the way. Can I tell you today that it's possible that it's part of God's process and not his punishment? This is so difficult when you're in the middle of these seasons. But we see that Joseph continued to walk in favor. He continued to walk in blessing. Can I tell you that favor can come in a place outside of the church? Many times we believe that God's favor is surrounded by other Christians and other believers, and if I just put myself in a cocoon of Christians and believers, then I can walk in God's favor. Joseph walked into a pagan environment with people in leadership that did not give a rip about his God. And it says that the Lord was with him and the Lord gave him favor. I believe that God's favor is on you when you trust him. But favor is a product of faithfulness. You see, Joseph was faithful to continue to look to God as his resource and his solution. He wasn't trying to figure I got to get myself out of this slavery. I got to get myself out. I got to escape. Instead, he embraced where he was and he kept his eyes on God. I'm going to paraphrase this next part because many of you would know. So Joseph is faithfully serving God, even in the midst of being in prison, right? So even before he was bought out of slavery, he was in prison, okay? He gets bought out of slavery. He's doing everything right. And then Potiphar's wife decides this is a good time to try to seduce Joseph. It says that Joseph was a good-looking man, and I would think that Potiphar's wife, because he was high-ranking, I'm just going to be honest, she was probably pretty good looking. She probably was. Because of the relationship she had with someone in charge, I bet you she was pretty good looking too, okay? So you have Potiphar's wife makes many advances on Joseph. It says that day after day after day, she tried to seduce him, and Joseph continually said, no, 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 no. Not only is it wrong because you're his wife, but more important than that, it's wrong because this would dishonor God. We see Joseph make a clean line of setting boundaries. This is what we teach in the church all the time, right? Set boundaries so that you don't find yourself in these crazy situations. Joseph set the line really hard. No, 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 no. I won't dishonor your husband, and I won't dishonor God. You would think, right? We're just going to be human about this for a moment. You would think that this would be the perfect opportunity for God to bless Joseph because of this incredible moment of discretion. This incredible moment of character and integrity. God would say, yes, Joseph, why don't Pharaoh out of the way because Joseph's coming in. This seems like it would make sense if we were writing the story. But here's what happens instead. Potiphar's wife decides, I can't get Joseph, so I'll ruin his life. She makes up a story, right? This was pre-video cameras. There was no one to dispute this report. She writes, or she makes up this whole claim and story that Joseph took advantage of her. She takes off Joseph's robe. She leaves it on the bed. When Potiphar comes in, she makes up this whole story that he tried to make sport of me. He came on to me and I rejected him. Well, naturally as a husband, Potiphar's pretty upset, and Potiphar says, okay, Joseph, I appreciate all of the things that you've done to me. In fact, Joseph was second in charge to Potiphar's entire house. But because of this decision, he throws him back into prison. It seems to not make sense with how God does things. He did the right thing. He made a critical choice and said no to sin, said no to temptation. And the result of that is now I go back to prison for 2 years? Like not a day, not 2 days, waiting for bail, 2 years. Joseph went to prison for doing the right thing. This is confounding to me as I read through it. Because so many times I always think if I just do the right thing and I can kind of play out the outcome to this. This doesn't make sense. And I don't know if there's someone here today, you feel like you're doing all the right things. You're paying your taxes, you're keeping up with all the different bills you have, you're trying to treat your wife right, you're trying to be a good employee, you're trying to do all the things right, and you just seem like you can't catch a break. Because as soon as one thing ends, then my health gets crazy. And as soon as my health gets right, then my marriage is getting crazy. And as soon as that, we think that we're doing all the right things. And so that should mean that we have no issues in our life. I don't know if it's just me, but I think that all the time. If I just do enough good and right things, that will lead God to kind of just giving me a free pass at life. If I'm Joseph, I'd be wondering, is God still in control? God, did I miss you somewhere? Did I miss part of your plan for my life? God, where did I get off and where did I go wrong in your plan for my life? Because this can't possibly be what you have for me. See, Joseph doesn't have a choice in going to prison. His choice is his perspective in prison. Doesn't make sense. And this month, I spent some time with someone in our church, and we're going to show you a video right now. Because if you were to stop this story right here, and if you weren't to read any further into this story, you would think that God is delusional, that God doesn't make sense, that God has lost his ability to actually be sovereign and control, and to move us towards the things that we talk about in the church world all the time. You would think that God is over his head if this is how the story ended. So you're going to watch a testimony in a moment, and the first parts of it are gripping. They're difficult. Sometimes we find ourselves in difficult situations because we've made poor choices, But sometimes we find ourselves in difficult situations because God allowed it. And this is not an easy concept in the church, but I want someone to know today that it maybe isn't because God's mad at you, and maybe because this is part of God's process and God's plan for your life. It's a difficult thing. So watch this. I will just say this, the audio on it, I did the best I could. It may be a little hard to hear. It might spike a little bit. Don't get caught up in that. Hear the story, hear the heart, find out what Jesus did, and I'll come up and close this when we're done.
I didn't grow up in a religious family. Pretty much God was someone you came to when someone was dying and you needed him to save them. Other than that, there was no talk about, I didn't even know who Jesus was, nothing. It was a good home though. I had a wonderful family, just didn't have that direction. When I was in 7th grade, I found out, or my parents told me that my dad wasn't my biological dad, which I think that's what kind of threw me into a downward kind of spiral of a reason to do drugs and alcohol. So since I was in like 6th grade, started drinking. In 7th grade, started doing more heavy drugs. Then when I was a sophomore, I ended up getting pregnant with my daughter Aubrey, and I was supposed to have an abortion, and I ended up having a mental breakdown because I was supposed to go on, it was a Friday, I was supposed to go on a Monday to get the abortion, and just during the weekend I just lost it, went kind of crazy, and talked to my parents and told them I didn't want to have an abortion, I wanted to have the baby. And my mom was scared for me, my dad agreed that it was the right thing to do, and so I did. Had Aubrey in 2003. That's when we found out my dad had liver failure, and so for 3 years my dad went downhill, and pretty much we had to take care of him, and I started drinking bottles of Captain Morgan like every day, trying to take care of him as my mom went to work. He ended up not knowing who we were, and it was really hard. I guess it's a trauma that still sticks with me. And he ended up getting a liver by God's grace that I thank God all the time for. But I was already down the road of complete full-on addiction in my 20s. I met Rob, Ava's dad. She's now 7. So he was actually in recovery when we met up. So I brought him into the drinking and all of that stuff, and then we moved in together, and when I was 25 we had Ava, and that was probably the best couple years was when I was pregnant, because we were sober. We had a great family and stuff, and then I don't know, a couple years later it all started going downhill. He started working a lot to provide, and then we started flipping a house, and I think that's where he started using, and I didn't know that he was using, so that he could work. And so he ended up telling me that he was addicted to pills in November of 2014. And instead of instead of me trying to help him, I kicked him out, and he went and lived with his mom. And in December, he came to Christmas Eve. We got home at around 10 o'clock, and we ended up getting in an argument over just, I can't even tell you. I have no idea what. It was just stupid. And I left to take Aubrey, the older one, to her dad, and I left Ava with him and told him I'd be right back, and I just went like 15 minutes away, came right back, and when I came inside, it was all quiet, and so I was yelling for him, you know. I walked in the house and I looked everywhere. I looked out back. I was yelling for him. Nobody was answering. I went in the baby's room and she wasn't in the crib, and that's when I started freaking out and started like yelling. And so I looked in our room and I saw her laying on the end of the bed, but not in a normal way. She was at the foot of the bed looking away, not facing the bed, but looking off, like she could have fell off the bed, and her drink was on the ground. And I was so mad, like, you know, she could fall off the bed. What is she doing sitting, laying like this? And she was sleeping. And so I pick her up and I turn around and I see Rob. I see Rob hanging in the closet. So, woke up the next morning at my parents' house on Christmas Day. I tried to make it normal. Ava asked where her dad was. And, I don't know. I can't even, it was all a fog. I remember helping her learn how to ride her first bike that we got her down my parents' street. So, after that, I still carry so much guilt, but carried a lot of guilt of a lot of things that I did when I was with Rob. A lot of the partying that I did where I didn't want to be a family and I just went and had fun, and I had to drink a 30-pack just to go to sleep because I couldn't sleep with all the visions. And my sister, she was a recovering alcoholic. She had been sober for 2 years. She relapsed and she was drinking with me, and you know, she was going through the pain of losing Rob too, and I didn't know how bad it got for her. I didn't know that she was drinking liquor bottles in the morning time. I didn't know that she kept them in her purse. I didn't know that she was drunk all day. I didn't know any of this. I knew I shouldn't have been drinking with her, but I was in my own mess, my own darkness. I couldn't see anything else. And while I was at work, I got a phone call from my dad 9 months later, after Rob died, that my sister had committed suicide. I remember going home, and there she was in my old room, just cold. I ended up making promises to myself that I wasn't going to disappoint my family. I wasn't going to have Rob and my sister's death be for nothing. I was invited to church. It took me a long time, but I went. I can't tell you what the message is, but it spoke to me, and that was my day of God speaking to me. He asked at the end if anybody wants to, was, changed and moved and wants to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, to, just raise your hand. And since everybody's eyes were closed and nobody's gonna look at me, I raised my hand, and I didn't really know at all what that meant, because again, I didn't really know about Jesus or anything, and I just knew that something was happening inside of me. So that's the day that I got saved, and it was pretty much a turning day for the rest of my life. I could not wait to be involved. I couldn't wait to come on Wednesday nights, come on Sunday mornings. I couldn't wait to get involved. I could not put down the New Testament. It was like opening me up. Unblinding my eyes, and went full-fledged into children's ministry, and I loved it. And everybody in my past is shocked by that, because I wasn't the person that was, I guess, motherly back then, and I wasn't someone that was with all the kids or anything like that. And so it was actually ironic, out of anything, for me to go into children's ministry. Then in February, only a month later, I got baptized. February 10th, best day of my life, and Eric baptized me, and I just, something incredible happened to me that day, and just like a fire, and I just was so, I knew that I would never go back, to how I was, and that I was changed forever. Ended up following Eric and Megan to the Bridge Church, and I didn't even know Eric and Megan. I mean, I knew them, but I wasn't close to them. So it was really weird for God to put inside of me that I had to go there and follow them. I wanted to be the director of children's ministry, and that was set inside of me, but I didn't have that belief really that I could. I wasn't, saved long enough, or didn't grow up as a Christian, or whatever. All the doubts that, get inside your head. But I took that leap of faith, and I followed, and Eric and Megan, they believed in me, and I'm forever grateful. I'm grateful for that, because now this place, the Bridge Church, is my family, and now I have lots more friends, and I've grown in so many different relationships, and I love teaching these kids, and I love seeing how powerful they are, and just their childlike faith. So I'm just excited for just what's next, and I'm excited to see people get saved here. I'm excited for their day, that day that I had, that day that changed my life. I'm excited for other people to have that day, that life-changing, no going back, day. And that's the story of God's redemption in my life.
Give me 4 minutes. I'll close in 4 minutes. If you stop that story, if you stopped it after horrific death, you would wonder, God, are you still out there? If you were to stop Joseph's story after he had a dream from God and he told his family and they rejected the dream and sold him into slavery, in that moment of slavery, you would say, God, where are you? How could you allow this? As you're bought and serving faithfully, and you are made second in charge of a household because of how faithful you've been, and then you get accused of something you didn't do, and you get sold back into prison, you would ask yourself the question, God, where are you? And then as you're in prison for 2 years, Joseph showed himself faithful over and over and over. Pharaoh had these dreams that he couldn't interpret, and someone had heard that Joseph was an interpreter of dreams. And so that's what got him the platform in front of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said, can you interpret these dreams? And Joseph does. He interprets the dreams as they're going to come into 7 years of really hard famine. And they're going to also, before that, have 7 years of incredible, bountiful blessing and harvest. Joseph interprets the dream. And this dream that he interprets makes him second in charge of all of Egypt. Pharaoh sees God in him and says, why don't you become second in charge? The only thing that they will respect me for more is the fact that I'm Pharaoh. You'll be in control over everything. At this point, Joseph is 39 years old. After these famines happen, and after this bounty happens, you remember at 17 years old when Joseph was sold into slavery? 22 years. Joseph had these incredible highs and these incredible lows. But it says that the Lord was with him always. And here's the crazy thing to me, is that it seems to me that that was God's process, not Joseph's punishment. So what do you do when God's process looks different than ours? What happens when our process that we've planned for ourselves doesn't involve punishment, doesn't involve pain, but sometimes serving God can be painful. But it's always worth it. Because at the end of this, his brothers come back and they stand before him and they're begging him for food. And the culmination of that dream that Joseph had at 17 and told his brothers, at 39 years old, as his brothers are begging him for food, as he's now second in charge of all of Egypt, the dream came full circle. Can I tell you, you might be in the middle of God's process, and it may look a lot different than you would have ever planned it for yourself. Can I tell you today, hold on. Don't let go. Joseph could have figured a man-made way out of that, but he said, no, God, you gave me the dream and I'll hold on to it. See, Joseph lived 30 years of a hard life. He lived 80 years of a blessed life. And I don't know what season of life you're in right now, but as we close here today, and we won't close with the worship song because of time, I'm going to close us here. I just want you to bow your heads and close your eyes with me for a moment. Critical choices can propel you or pummel you. Let me ask you some questions as we close. Are you here today and you need to trust God in a new way? You need to remind yourself that God is sovereign, that He is in control, that He's not surprised by your life. You need to remind yourself, Romans 8:28, that He works together all things for good for those that love Him and are called according to His purpose. Today, do you need to hold on to the fact that God is working good in the midst of what seems like punishment or bad? Maybe that's you today. Maybe today God needed you to hear about how Joseph forgave his brothers. The same brothers that tried to kill him were the same brothers that he lavishly poured out food on when they were starving 22 years later. Maybe today you need to hear that story of forgiveness and redemption, and maybe that's what you need to do. You need to have a conversation with a family member or a friend, someone that you need to forgive or reconcile with. Maybe that's why God brought you here today. Maybe you need to revive a dream. As crazy as that dream was, maybe it was at a youth camp when you were a teenager. Maybe it was last month, but it seemed ridiculous. It would cost you too much. It would alter your life. And so you kind of just said, no, I don't think that was from God. Maybe today God wants to revive a dream. Or maybe God's calling you to support someone else's dream. And lastly, maybe today God brought you here so that He could change your perspective. That even in the midst of prison, God was still at work. God had never left. In fact, that was God's plan, is that Joseph would be in prison. And that's so alarming to our senses because we don't want discomfort. We don't want challenge. But God, would you create a heart in us that seeks after you, that chooses to go wherever you send us, whatever you have in store for us, God, I just pray that we would have a yes in our heart. So today as we close, keep your eyes closed and your heads bowed. If you're here today and you're hearing the message that God is not done with you, that God has not forgotten you, that God is for you, and you're here today and you say, I don't have a personal relationship with Jesus. I've not made a decision to follow Him. He's not the Lord of my life. But today, I want to do that. I don't want to leave here the same. Just right in your seat, would you just look up at me? You don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to do anything. Just look up at me, make eye contact with me for a moment. I don't want to leave here the way I came in. I came in here without Jesus. I'm leaving here with Him. Several people just looked at me. I love this. Jesus, right now, God, I thank you for each person that's here today that says, I want to start a new life in you. If you're here, would you pray this in your heart? Jesus, I know I've made mistakes. I know I've messed up. I know I've missed the mark. But today, I choose you. God, I give you my sin. I give you my doubts. I give you my failures. I want to know more about your Son, Jesus. If you prayed that prayer today, we're going to have some people up here as people exit. We would love that you would come and let us have a conversation. Let us give you a Bible. Let us help set you up. Jesus, I just pray over the rest of the church as we close. We'll close differently than normal. But Father, I pray that you would go with them. I pray that you would encourage them, that you are with them. You've never left them. You don't even know what it looks like to walk away from us. So God, that people would know, even if they're in the middle of a difficult season, that you are with them, that it is potentially even part of your plan that they walk through that. Bring people alongside them to encourage them. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen, church. We will see you next Sunday, 9:30, 11:15.